In this part, we are going to see some types of bones, and we will talk about the joints and the movement of the joints. So in our body, we have around 206 bones, and we have, based on their shapes, we can classify them as long bones, like the bones of the limbs and fingers, short bones, like the bones of the wrist, flat bones, like the cranial bones, the bones of the skull, the sternum, the ribs, and irregular bones, like the vertebra and the coxal bone. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the functions of the bones, they will provide support, they will protect, they will provide, or the joints formed by joining two bones would provide flexible movement. Also, they will preserve the calcium and the phosphor, and also the bone marrow is important in formation of blood cells. So all of these are functions, general functions of the skeleton. Now, for the skeleton itself, we have two types. We have the axial skeleton, and the axial skeleton is around the midline of the body. So we are talking about the skull, the vertebral column, and the thoracic cage. These are the parts of the axial skeleton. Whereas the appendicular skeleton, we are talking about the bones of the limbs, including, of course, the feet, and also the bones that holding the ribs. The bones of the limbs and the bones are holding these limbs to the axial skeleton. Now, for these slides, I'm not going to go through them because they are pretty straightforward, and we are going to see them in the lab. So I'm going to skip them to save you like a few minutes, because I'm going to read it slide by slide, and it is pretty straightforward. So we will talk about them. Go through them, please. Post again your questions, your notes, your comments on the forum. Check on the others. If there is anything, any area of concern, we can talk about it when we meet in the lab. So I will skip all of these, and I will move directly to the joints. Now, for the joints, as we understand, they will form the connection between bones, and we classify them by their degree of movement. And in this case, we have something called fibrous joints. These are immovable joints, and these are like the joints between flat bones of the skull. You know, the skull is made out of several bones, and what joins them is a kind of a fibrous connective tissue. So this is the fibrous joint. Then we have the second type is cartilaginous joints. These are slightly movable. They have some degree of movable. And what connects them is the cartilage. So the two bones, technically, they are not attached to each other. No, there is some space, and that space is filled with cartilage. Okay, so like joints between adjacent vertebra, our vertebral disc is made out of cartilaginous joint. And the third type is synovial joint. These are freely movable joints, and bones are separated by a fluid-filled cavity. So for example, like the knee, we have the femur and we have the tibia. There is a good space between them, and there is a capsule, and that space is filled with synovial fluid. Okay, filled with the fluid. Now, the synovial joints are the most important type of joint in our body, because these are the ones enabling us to move. We are talking about the hip, the knee, the shoulder, the elbow, even our fingers. All of these joints are made or a type of synovial joint. And there are main characteristics of these synovial joints. See, for example, this is the knee. So if we want to see the main characteristic of a synovial joint, we will have the joint capsula, which is here. So this is like a capsule. Within it, there is the synovial fluid, and it is made of a membrane. So the outer cover, this cover is membrane, and of course, it has some cartilage, a hyaline cartilage within it. And from inside, there is a synovial membrane that would release or secrete the synovial fluid. So the synovial fluid would be filling all of this capsule and will act as a lubricant. It will smooth the movement between the femur and the tibia. Then we have the hyaline cartilage that is in the light blue. That would reduce the friction between the bones, okay? And this is another like characteristic of synovial joints. So the joint capsule, the hyaline cartilage, and also, and of course, the fluid. So these are like the three characteristics of joints. We are going to talk about them. Now, in addition to that, we have subtypes of the synovial joints. We have the hinge joint, like the knee. The knee is a hinge joint. The elbow also is a hinge joint. And we have the ball and socket, like the shoulder and the hip. Hinge because it's acting like, you know, a hinge, a door hinge. There is a bone and another bone that would articulate to it. Whereas with the ball and socket, there is a ball and there is a socket surrounding this ball, like the hip or the shoulder. So the names are coming directly from the shape of the joint. Now, along with the joints, of course, these bones are attached to each other by ligaments. So ligaments are going to attach bone to bone in a synovial joint. Example like the anterior cruciate ligament in the knee. If we go back to here to see it, so for example, this is the anterior cruciate ligament. It attaching bone to bone. So the ligaments are bone to bone. Along with the ligaments, we have the tendons. The tendons are attaching muscles to bones. So these are the tendons. This is the patella. This is the bone, and it attaching these tendons are attaching the muscle fibers to this bone. And similarly here, these are in white. All of these are tendons, and they are attaching the muscle fibers to the bones. Now, both tendons and ligaments are made of very thick, very strong, a very tough connective tissue. So they won't tear up under pressure or under stretch or during rough exercises. We need very strong connections between the bones and between the muscles so we can move. So these would provide very strong connection, but yet it is flexible. It is a flexible connection between these bones. And in general, these muscles would stabilize the bones, will stabilize the joint itself in general. Now, these joints, they can perform different functions, not different functions, different movements. Like for example, abduction, when we are separating the limbs, or adduction, when we are adding them, or extension, when we are increasing the angle of the joint, or flexion, when we are decreasing the angle of the joint. Also, we have the rotation, when we are moving a joint in a circular movement around its axle. So this is a rotation. We have a circumduction, movement of a limb, so that it describes as a cone. So all of this is circumduction. Okay, so these are the maybe 6 different types of movement: abduction, adduction, flexion, extension, or extension, flexion, then rotation, and the circumduction. These are the movements you need to be aware of about the joint movement. The last thing we will need to understand or to get a general idea about it is some diseases and disorders of skeletal systems. We have the sprains. These are stretched or torn ligaments. Usually they will heal slowly because there are few cells and poor blood supplies. There are bursitis and tendinitis. This inflammation of bursa or tendons because of the overusage in general. Then there are the arthritis, inflammation of the joints, like osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. This, for example, relate to age and very chronic. And also we have the osteoporosis, which is the excessive bone loss or the loss of the bone mass. And as we said, this is imbalance between the osteocyte and the osteoclast activities. See, for example, this is a healthy normal bone, and this is a bone with osteoporosis. As you can see, all of these boards within the bone, it causes a loss of the bone mass, and this bone is very fragile and it can break easily. So this is all about this chapter. Please again post your questions, your comments, your videos in the forum. Check all the other students' questions, try to answer them, and we will talk more when we meet. See you then.